attack on the 2016 election. And the FBI director says look for more election cyber attacks in 2020, echoing Robert Mueller's warning that the Russians are still at it. So why did Republicans just block bills to boost election security? Moving too slowly. As the president takes a victory lap after the Mueller testimony, Democrats who hoped Mueller would provide a push for impeachment efforts say their leadership is moving too slowly. But Speaker Nancy Pelosi says she's not standing in anyone's way. Budget balk. As the House moves to pass a sweeping budget and debt limit deal negotiated with the Trump administration, some of the president's conservative allies are balking. Even though he's backed the bill, will he change his mind? And Kim's new missiles. North Korea's dictator fires off a pair of new missiles which could threaten targets in South Korea and Japan. Is Kim Jong-un sending a direct threat to President Trump? I'm Wolf Blitzer. You're in the Situation Room.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Breaking news, a bipartisan report concludes Russia carried out an extensive assault on U.S. election infrastructure centered around the 2016 election. The Senate Intelligence Committee says the Russians sought to exploit the seams between federal authorities and states which largely run U.S. elections. The heavily redacted report says America's cyber defenses have improved, but the threat remains urgent. That comes as the FBI expects more election-related cyber attacks in 2020. Director Christopher Wray says the goal is to sow division and undermine voter confidence in the United States. And that warning comes a day after former special counsel Robert Mueller, a one-time FBI chief, warned that Russia is still interfering in the U.S. electoral process, calling that one of the most serious challenges to American democracy. But twice in the last 24 hours, Senate Republicans have blocked legislation aimed at boosting election security. I'll speak with Congressman Eric Swalwell of the Judiciary and Intelligence Committees, and our correspondents and analysts will have full coverage of the day's top stories. Let's go straight to Capitol Hill and our senior congressional correspondent, Manu Raju. Manu, this Senate Intel report is part of a 2-year ongoing investigation, and it's raising a lot of red flags.
Yeah, that's right. Urging states and the federal government to do more, saying that the Russian government exploited divisions between state governments and the federal government, and saying that this is something that needs to be shored up in the elections ahead. And one of the recommendations that they do make here is to ensure that there are backup paper ballots throughout state election systems to ensure that if there's any nefarious activity, that there's something to back it up to make sure that those election results are sufficient and that they're accurate portrayal of how voters actually came down. Now, the committee also found, they said, no evidence of Russian actors actually trying to manipulate vote tallies, but they say that the Intelligence Committee does not have a window into exactly how votes may have been affected back in the 2016 elections. But they make very clear in this 67-page bipartisan report that there was extensive activity that was directed by the Russian government between the years of 2014 and 2017, all designed to exploit the seams between the federal government and the state government, urging those seams to be closed. Now, the FBI Director Christopher Wray has been sounding similar alarms as he did today, warning that the Russian threat still exists heading into 2020.
We expect much of the same in 2020, especially with new cyber tools that are continuing to fall in the hands of adversaries who would do us harm. Things like some of the services that are sold on the darknet, or some of the DDoS capabilities that have become available to an even wider range of would-be hacktivists.
Now, there have been several bills that have been moving through the Senate that Democrats in particular have been pushing. There have been some bipartisan bills, some that have been done on a party line basis. And today, Democrats again tried to renew efforts to move those election security bills, but they were blocked by Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell.
It's just a highly partisan bill from the same folks who spent 2 years hyping up a conspiracy theory about President Trump and Russia.
Now, what McConnell has been arguing is that the efforts that have already been undertaken are essentially enough. Enough money has been spent. He argues that in 2018, they did a good job of securing the election infrastructure, and further legislation certainly is not necessary, but he is facing pressure from some within his own ranks, some Republicans, and a growing number of Democrats demanding action in the wake of the Mueller report and the wake of concerns raised by Christopher Wray. The question is, will the majority leader move off of his opposition? At the moment, he's saying no because he believes these efforts are duplicative, in his view, partisan. Wolf.
Yeah, Robert Mueller yesterday made it clear he's deeply concerned about these kinds of cyber attacks going after the elections here in 2020, a day after his testimony, though, on another sensitive issue. Manu, where are the Democrats when it comes to the issue of impeachment?
Well, behind the scenes, there has been a robust debate about how to proceed. Immediately after yesterday's hearing, Nancy Pelosi heard from a number of her members who wanted to know the way to move forward. Jerry Nadler, the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, even floated the idea of drafting articles of impeachment, I'm told. But Pelosi at the moment still wants to fight this issue in court. But when I asked her today whether she would try to dissuade any of her members from not voicing their support for an impeachment inquiry, she made clear she would give her members green light to do whatever they need to do. Are you going to discourage your members at all from announcing their support for an impeachment inquiry?
Never have done that. I've never have done that.
Now, some of Pelosi's allies believe that her tone has shifted. Perhaps she's more open now, but at the moment, Democrats want to keep their focus on those court fights and see what happens next. But some are worried time is running short and that they're going to run out of time here, not just this year, but then when they run into the election year next year, it'll make things even more complicated moving forward with impeachment proceedings, Wolf.
It's a very, very busy day up on Capitol Hill today, maybe the last day before they go into their recess. Lawmakers have been voting now for the past several minutes on this 2-year spending and debt limit deal. We're looking at the results on the screen right now. They're still voting, but it clearly looks like it's going to pass relatively easily.
Yeah, relatively easily. The interesting number there, Wolf, is the Republican no vote on your screen there. At the moment, 132 Republicans are voting no. Now, that's not a final number, so it could grow. It looks like it's 133 now. And that's significant because the president had made an effort to urge his members to support this deal. He tweeted in support of this deal. He cut this deal with Democratic leaders and other Republicans to try to move forward and get a deal. What it would do, why Republicans in the House are not happy about this, is that it would increase federal spending by $320 billion over 2 years. Also, it would suspend the debt limit up until July of 2021, essentially punting that issue of a debt limit until after the 2020 elections. And the reason why they cut this deal, Wolf, is that they were concerned about deep spending cuts that were bound to take effect this fall. Also, the potential of a debt default if the national debt limit were not reached. So the administration cut a deal with the Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, who pushed for more domestic spending. Republicans pushed for more defense spending. So both sides pushing for more spending. They pushed off the debt limit increase amid these record high debt levels and $1 trillion deficits, raising a lot of concerns from members, which is why the president's party is not listening to him when he says support this deal.
But it now goes to the Senate where it's expected to pass, right?
Yeah, it should pass probably next week, but still, we're hearing concerns from Republicans about the numbers, the spending levels there, so expect a potential revolt of sorts from Republicans, but probably not enough to stop this from eventually becoming law.
And the White House says the president will sign it into law. All right, Manu Raju up on Capitol Hill. I want to get back to the breaking news, our top story, the Senate Intelligence Committee report on Russian election interference. I want to bring in our political correspondent, Sarah Murray, along with former FBI General Counsel Jim Baker. He's a CNN legal analyst. Guys, I've gone through this report. You have as well. What, about 64 pages, Select Committee on Intelligence, Russian active measures campaigns, and interference in the 2016 election. Jim Baker, give us your major takeaway.
So the major takeaway is that there is a significant threat from Russia and from other foreign actors who might try to take advantage of weaknesses in our election system. The Senate Intelligence Committee is one of the best committees up on the Hill, and their staff is excellent. And so we need to take this very seriously. They've laid out a bunch of recommendations that we need to think about. And if the majority leader in the Senate is not happy with the legislation that we were just discussing, then come up with something else. But this needs to be addressed, and we're running out of time.
It's critically
important thing, and we're running out of time. The states need help.
You're absolutely right. You know, Sarah, unlike the House Intelligence Committee, which has seen a lot of drama and partisanship, the Senate Intelligence Committee, these guys work pretty much in tandem And I think it's reflected in this report.
Yeah, I mean, the House committee became a spectacle in the way that the Senate committee really did not. And we're seeing this is a bipartisan report. And, you know, it's not a bunch of red meat. These are sort of practical things that you could do to secure our election system. So we're talking about replacing old voter machines. We're talking about increasing the security around voter rolls, encouraging states to resist the urge to move any kind of voting online because those platforms are not secure. And, you know, it's interesting to look through this report at the same day that Mitch McConnell says, no, we're good here, everything's secure, because that's certainly not the takeaway from the bipartisan members of this committee.
It certainly isn't. The report says the government simply didn't do enough to warn about all these threats and the vulnerabilities which clearly exist. One committee member, Senator Ron Wyden, a Democrat of Oregon, says the government shouldn't expect local officials to do what the federal government is more qualified to do. He writes this. This is Wyden. We would not ask a local sheriff to go to war against the missiles, planes, and tanks of the Russian army. We shouldn't ask a country election IT employee to fight a war against the full capabilities and vast resources of Russia's cyber army. Does he have a point?
Well, he has a point, but up to a point. Because if we take some of the lessons we learned dealing with counterterrorism after 9/11, what we realized is there's a role for everybody. The federal government has a role, and state and local authorities have a role to deal, because they're the first responders, as we all know. They're the ones that confront people who pose a threat most directly sometimes. So it needs to be a coherent, well-organized level, or well-organized response at every level if we're going to try to be effective here.
You know, the timing of this report is very significant. It comes a day after Robert Mueller testified, and he warned of all of these threats as well, but that didn't necessarily come across during the course of the hearing.
Well, you know, we had a full day of hearings, but I do think, you know, the one thing we've learned from the 2 times Bob Mueller has spoken publicly is he has been most forceful in each of those instances. That, you know, 10-minute statement he gave, and then when he was appearing before the committees, and essentially saying the biggest concern, the biggest takeaway here is that there was a hostile foreign power that interfered in our election, and they are going to continue to do that, and we need to take that seriously, and that's something that everyone on all sides of the aisle should care about, because at the end of the day, when you go into the ballot box, you cast your vote, you want to walk out and you want to feel confidence in American elections. That's what this report is about, and that's, I think, what Robert Mueller wanted everyone to take away after his appearance on the Hill yesterday.
And the threat is so significant. This shouldn't be a partisan issue at all. But you notice during the course of the hearings yesterday, few Republicans chose to use any of their time talking to Mueller about this threat. Instead, they were going after his entire Russia investigation, and that's a problem. That's
a big problem. So I think, you know, for example, Republicans should be worried about this, because if there are questions about the security of an election and the results, and they win, well, they're going to have a cloud over them, right? So they should be worried about that. Secondly, they should not assume that the Russians are always going to be supporting President Trump and his allies. The Russians just want disruption, disorder, and chaos. And however they can achieve that, they will. And they may take a different view about President Trump at the last moment or at any point.
The president, his national security officials, the intelligence community, people he's appointed, like Pompeo and Dan Coates, among others, they keep saying this is a huge threat, but we rarely hear that from the president himself. He either ignores it, doesn't talk about it. Why is that?
Well, you know, because he believes that if you acknowledge the fact that Russia tried to interfere in our election, that delegitimizes his victory. It means he got help to become president. But, you know, if you look at it along the way the president has acted alongside this report, I mean, one of its top recommendations is we need to create effective deterrence, which means we need to send a signal to countries that are trying to meddle in our election that we're not going to stand for this. And also we're going to retaliate in ways that are painful and that are costly to you. And, you know, we've seen other members, as you pointed out, of the administration talking about things like that, but we have not heard it from the president. And that is sort of stunning when you think about, you know, the fact that we are so far along into his presidency and he still can't put aside his own personal grievance about this issue and his own personal feelings to say we need to do something that's better for the country going forward.
Sarah Murray, Jim Baker, thanks very much. A very, very important issue. Let's continue the conversation with Democratic Congressman Eric Swalwell of California. He's a key member of both the Judiciary and Intelligence Committees. I know you got to vote momentarily, but let me get your thoughts on your committee, the House Intelligence Committee, conducting its own investigation into Russia's ongoing activities. What are the biggest vulnerabilities, Congressman, right now in America's electoral infrastructure?
Good evening, Wolf. The biggest vulnerability is the president. He is the leader of our country, and it doesn't matter how hard the FBI agents and the NSA and CIA work if they don't have leadership at the top and they don't have a commander-in-chief directing them and giving them the resources they need. All the best resources will not prevent another attack. And I see these threats every day on the House Intelligence Committee. Russia is determined to continue to do this, and I fear that we are more vulnerable than we were in 2016 because Russia and other countries will see the United States is open for business when it comes to interference.
Well, do you worry that the Russians have developed the capability to actually change vote counts in the United States?
Yes.
So what does Congress need to do to tackle this problem? Is there a particular program or department that needs more funding, for example?
Yes. Yesterday, Bob Mueller gave us a call to action. I thought it was very hair-raising when he said that this cannot be the new normal and that as we were convening there with him, that the Russians were attacking us in that very moment. That was his word. So unity is the best antidote to what the Russians are doing, but you don't see that from the president. You don't see that on Capitol Hill. Wolf, I've tried to not just investigate, but also to legislate. I've written legislation to require every campaign to tell the FBI if they're offered dirt by a foreign agent. I've written legislation to require social media companies to tell the FBI if foreign adversaries are using their platforms. There's a lot that we can do that is not partisan, and as you pointed out earlier, it may not be the Republicans who benefit next time, so it's in all of our interests to find unity.
From what you've read, do the Senate Intelligence Committee's conclusions differ from those your committee, the House Intelligence Committee, reached?
Their report came out today, Wolf, and we had a couple Intelligence Committee meetings today, so I've not had a chance to fully review it, but I do accept the facts that the men and women who are working at the intelligence communities, they understand the risk, and I talk to them often. But again, it has to come from the top, and that starts with the president directly confronting the man who ordered the attack against America and telling Vladimir Putin, we will not stand for this. But instead, as I pointed out yesterday, from January 2017 to March 2019, the pendency of the Trump inauguration to the end of the Mueller report, Donald Trump met with Vladimir Putin 6 times, had 10 telephone calls, and exchanged 4 letters. And when he was asked to meet with the person investigating Putin's attack, he met with them 0. That's the problem. Because
this isn't about Facebook ads or stuff like that. This is actually about a cyber attack that could dramatically change the view, the democracy here in the United States, change totals in an election.
Wolf, I fear that we cannot weather another attack like this. We can survive one attack, and if we learn from it, we'll be better off in future elections. We can't handle another attack from Russia, and even worse, we can't handle a 2 or 3 front war if other countries with similar capabilities see a chance to get in on U.S. elections.
Well, do other hostile countries, let's say like North Korea or Iran, have a similar capability? Let's say China, for that matter.
Yes, Wolf, there are many other countries with similar capabilities, and I can't see how they would see anything other than green lights, considering the way that this president has welcomed Russia's attack and even said recently to George Stephanopoulos, if he was offered dirt again, he would do exactly the same thing. That's the problem. Republicans and Democrats, this has to be a call to unity. We have to answer the special counsel's call that we unite around this challenge.
I know you got to run, but very quickly, let's talk about Mueller's testimony yesterday, the debate over impeachment. You currently support beginning an impeachment inquiry. I'm curious what you're hearing from your colleagues. Is Mueller's testimony moving lawmakers toward your position in favor of beginning an impeachment process?
Yes, I've spoken privately with some of them, and I expect more calls in the next few days. Well, if I don't expect fewer people to say they don't want impeachment. I don't think people who've already made the call are going to come forward and say, after hearing yesterday what the special counsel said, take me off that letter. You know, plainly, when this sinks in for people, they will see that Russia attacked us. They had a preference for Donald Trump. The Trump campaign welcomed it and planned around it. And when the police investigated it, the president and his team went to great lengths to cover it up. That should concern all of us. And the only way to stop this from happening again is to hold a lawless president accountable.
I know you got to vote, so go ahead and vote. Congressman Eric Swalwell, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Wolf.
Up next, President Trump taking a victory lap after Mueller's testimony as Democrats remain deeply divided over impeachment. Also, let's get some insight from our political and national security experts. And Sean Turner, let me get your thoughts on this lengthy report from the Senate Intelligence Committee warning that the Russians, they were very active in 2016, but potentially they could be a lot more destructive in 2020, including potentially changing vote tallies.
Yeah, absolutely, Wolf. And look, this report echoes what I think intelligence officials, including DHS and the FBI, have been sounding the alarm about for quite some time. And it's really quite simple that our election process is and has and will continue to be under attack in the cyberspace. There are two things in this report that I think are really key for people to pay attention to. The report points out that the objective of the Russians in cyberspace may have been to simply undermine our election. And it's important that people understand that what that means is that even though we saw the Russians attempt to get into state-level election systems and probe around those systems, and even when they got in, we didn't see the Russians actually do anything. But we know that they were noisy, and we know that they wanted us to know that they were there. And what that should tell people is that they wanted the American people to know they were there. So they wanted to undermine the election system. The other thing about this report that really jumped out at me is it's a little bit lopsided in how it talks about the cooperation between government and the states. The government certainly did have some shortcomings with regard to notifying the states, but we also have to remember that there were several states that were not real happy when the government came knocking to talk about what was happening in these electoral systems. So we need to make sure that cooperation is there. Yes, so I know a much overdue report, but very good for the American people to see it.
A very important report indeed. Dana, some of Robert Mueller's most compelling testimony yesterday dealt with this Russian threat.
Absolutely. That was what he was most animated about, what he wanted to talk about the most, because it is a threat and it is something that we have known about for 4 years now. The fact that this report talks not just about bots and fake news, real fake news, not the kind the president talks about, and the kind of meddling we saw on social media, but actually, as you said, changing votes. I mean, that should make every single American make them physically sick, because that is the ultimate messing with American democracy. And the fact that we know it and it's written on paper in a bipartisan way, and if it's not dealt with and American voting systems aren't protected, shame on us.
You get the impression that despite this report, despite Mueller's warnings, people in Congress are taking this threat seriously?
Well, it depends who you're talking about, Wolf. I mean, yesterday there were a few bills that were brought over to the United States Senate concerning election security, and they were blocked, completely and totally blocked.
By Republican senators?
By Republicans. One was about more funding to the states for election security. Another one was sort of establishing that it is completely illegal to take information or money from foreign actors during a campaign. I mean, these are kind of basic things. And for some reason, the Republicans say, wait a minute, this is a state issue, and these things need to be completely bipartisan. And by the way, we've protected our elections already, so we don't need to do this. And yet, Mueller was screaming. Well, he wasn't screaming, but he was animated. Let me put it that way. He was animated about this yesterday. And the American people, as Dana is saying, should be up in arms that Congress, which is duly elected, is not doing more about this issue.
You think in part the Republican attitudes to block votes on this very sensitive issue is a reflection of the president's own, at least public, indifference to the Russian threat?
Let me be brief. Yes.
Next.
Right. From the top, who's the biggest, most high-profile person in our government, Democrat or Republican, who has voiced repeated skepticism in the face of unanimous decisions and announcements by the intelligence community, under oath testimony by intelligence officials, that Russia interfered in our election to help Donald Trump and hurt Hillary Clinton? Donald Trump. I mean, It sends a chilling message. We've known this even before this report, even before these warnings. It sends a chilling message when the guy or woman at the top doesn't take it seriously. It's very hard to get other people in the administration to take it seriously.
Just add one thing to what you both said, particularly, Gloria, about Republicans. What Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, said, the reason why he wasn't going to take it up and block it is because it was partisan, and that he feels that the Congress has already done enough with past bills to deal with election security. So it is doubly on him now if it goes wrong. I mean, he has completely exposed himself by not doing this. Now, are there partisan aspects to the bill that the House passed? Maybe, but that's why you have a compromise. You look at that and you figure out where you can work it out. They did it on a multi-trillion-dollar spending bill. They can do it on something to protect American democracy.
And if Donald Trump put out a tweet tomorrow that said, we do need to protect our elections, let's pass a bill, the Republican view would change. And
what about when he says the election was rigged?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. And that's in that sense, I mean, the fact that he's so skeptical sends the exact opposite.
Well, let me get Sean to weigh in, because Sean, you used to work for the Director of National Intelligence. So when you have a president who has either been silent or poo-poos this entire threat, whereas the national security community, the intelligence community, they think it's a real threat. Some of them are even saying we might have to go back to paper ballots down the road if this threat escalates. What does that mean?
Well, look, I can tell you, Wolf, that there is a state of disbelief in the national security space over the fact that we are not hearing from the very top that this is the number one priority of the president, and it absolutely should be. Look, there's discussion in the intelligence community about whether or not we have the right authorities to be able to protect our election infrastructure, and whether or not there needs to be more done by some of the federal agencies. And those questions aren't being answered. This absolutely must be the top priority of the president, because we have to understand that it's not just Russia that's looking at what's happening here. Russia really feels as though they had a win, because a lot of the world believes that they had an impact on who the leader of the free world is. We know that other countries are looking very closely at this. So the national security infrastructure, people in the national security space are really concerned about this, and they're waiting and need to hear from the president on this issue.
But the president has said, if there were an offer, why wouldn't I look at it? So the president, in a way, Sean, has already spoken, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
With the
absolute
has
wrong
remained
message.
silent.
Exactly.
In the face of all these threats. On the Mueller testimony yesterday, it went on for several hours. Going into the testimony, I think there were like 93 Democrats who wanted to begin impeachment proceedings. I think there are 94 right now. Not necessarily a huge change.
No, absolutely. And look, 94 looks like a very big number, and it is, except when you consider the fact that it's not even half of the Democratic caucus, and when you consider the fact that if it got to the point where they'd have to take a vote, it's not 218, which is what you need. That's a big deal. And that is why, as we reported yesterday, right after the hearings were over, Nancy Pelosi met with her caucus to try to calm them down, those 90-something, and also let them know that there is at least some plan in place for how they go forward in the courts, to continue to pursue lawsuits, to get information from the grand jury, to get Don McGahn, the White House counsel, and others to come testify. And then they're going to make the decision. So
at this point, Gloria, what else could possibly move Democrats in the House of Representatives towards impeachment?
Well, I think some of the things Dan is talking about. I mean, if you get Don McGahn,
that could be a game changer.
I think
former White House counsel.
I mean, I know we talked. Maybe Mueller was a game changer, but Don McGahn could be it's a cliche at this point, the John Dean of this story. Because he is he was in the White House, and he was a key witness for Bob Mueller. Hearing from Bob Mueller is one thing, hearing from Don McGahn would be another. But that's a whole legal issue, and the courts don't move very quickly. So I do think that's one thing that could convince more Democrats. And then again, the president is so unpredictable that there could be something that comes out of the sky that we just don't know about.
I was just listening to Eric Swalwell earlier, and you asked, were you surprised more Democrats didn't come out? And he said, well, Wolf, everyone who's already said that they're in favor of impeaching Donald Trump, no one's going to back off of that because of the hearing. It's like, well, yeah, but to Dana's point, there's 94 of them, and there's 235 House Democrats. I mean, the point wasn't, hey, guys, let's maintain everybody who's already called for his impeachment. The point was we need to grow, whether it's in Congress or more broadly in public sentiment, grow this group, and that didn't happen. And I'm with Gloria. Short of McGahn, which is going to be fought tooth and nail legally, it's hard to see.
Letting him testify. Because right now the White House says
they're fighting.
He's the former White House counsel.
Executive privilege.
Right. He can't testify. This could go on for a while. All right, guys, thanks very much. There's more breaking news. We're following a more aggressive Joe Biden with less than a week to go before the Democratic debates right here on CNN. Now, Biden and his rivals, they are trading sharper and sharper jabs.
The CNN Democratic presidential debates starting Tuesday at 8 on CNN.
As we count down to next week's CNN Democratic presidential debates, former Vice President Joe Biden has stopped ignoring his rival's jabs and started to hit back. Let's go to CNN's Arlette Saenz. Arlette, tell us more about the former vice president's shift in tone.
Well, Wolf, Joe Biden has really adopted this more aggressive, direct approach in engaging with his Democratic rivals. One advisor telling me that after the last debate, Biden decided that he needed to fight back a little bit harder and that he's not going to take attacks on him and his record sitting down. And you're seeing this all play out right now in a few instances, one of those being between Joe Biden and Cory Booker, who has been very critical of the former vice president on criminal justice issues and has also criticized his current criminal justice plan, calling the former vice president the architect of mass incarceration. And Biden fired back, taking a shot at Cory Booker's own record as mayor of Newark, New Jersey. Take a listen to what he had to say.
If you look at the mayor's record in Newark, one of the provisions I wrote in the crime bill, a pattern and practice of misbehavior, his police department was stopping and frisking people, mostly African-American men. I'm happy to debate with anybody the effects of the things that I did as a United States Senator, as I did as a vice president.
Now, Biden has also been hearing directly from voters, urging him to take a stronger tone in the upcoming debate. And last night, he was asked about that at a fundraiser. And Biden said he is not going to be as polite this time around, referencing that moment between himself and Kamala Harris when it came to busing. Wolf.
Arlette, what else are you learning about what Biden will be doing leading up to next week's debate?
Well, Biden says he's going to be sitting down with his top advisors and staff in the days leading up to the debate. I'm told he'll also be running through some mock debates. But the Biden campaign is bracing for the other Democratic candidates on that stage to take aim at the former vice president and try to make their own debate moment. And what one campaign official told me a short while ago was everyone is looking for their T-shirt moment. And Joe Biden thinks this is bigger than selling T-shirts, that being a reference to the busing exchange with Kamala Harris at the last debate when her campaign had T-shirts ready after that exchange, a preview of the fireworks that could be coming next week.
All right, Arlette Saenz reporting for us. Thanks very much. And be sure to tune in next Tuesday and Wednesday nights for the CNN Democratic presidential debates, 10 candidates each night, beginning at 8 p.m. Eastern. Coming up, what message is Kim Jong-un now trying to...
This is CNN Breaking News.
Breaking news tonight, urgent new warnings of ongoing Russian election interference targeting the 2020 presidential race. The Senate Intelligence Committee and the FBI Director, Christopher Wray, they said separately today that the United States remains vulnerable while Russia remains intent on interfering in the next U.S. election. Former FBI Director and Special Counsel Robert Mueller gave a similar warning in his testimony yesterday. Despite that, Republicans have now blocked election security bills in the Senate for 2 days in a row. The Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, dismissed one bill, saying it's, quote, from the same folks who spent 2 years hyping up a conspiracy theory about President Trump and Russia. We'll talk about all the breaking news and much more with two members of the House Intelligence Committee, Republican Will Hurd and Democrat Ted Lieu. And our correspondents and analysts are also standing by. First, let's go to CNN congressional correspondent Sunlen Srifati. She's up on Capitol Hill for us tonight. Sunlen, this Senate Intelligence Committee report is part of a 2-year investigation, and it's raising a lot of red flags.
Significant red flags, Wolf, here. About how they believe Russia is still looking to influence the upcoming 2020 election. This is a bipartisan report, 67 pages from the Senate Intelligence Committee, the results of 2 years of their work and their investigation. They looked at Russia's attacks on the U.S. election infrastructure in the 2016 campaign, and they concluded, according to this report, that Russia directed extensive activity against the U.S. election infrastructure infrastructure and exploited the seams between federal authorities and state authorities. And they certainly make recommendations about going forward in the upcoming election, this imminent warning that they have on their mind of what the U.S. could do, including, of course, the use of paper ballots to provide a paper trail for voters and better communication between federal government and local authorities. Here's a top Democrat on the Senate Intelligence Committee, Mark Warner.
One of the things that we discovered, which we've talked about before, was really how vulnerable our systems were in 2016. And while I think the Russians wanted to come in and rattle the doors or rattle the windows, they found the doors unlocked and the windows wide open. And in many ways, we were just lucky that they didn't either change vote totals or move voters from one precinct to another. I think we found that you need those paper ballot backups. You need an audited system.
And this, of course, follows very similar warnings coming from the former special counsel Robert Mueller up here on Capitol Hill yesterday during his high-profile testimony. And today, the FBI director, Christopher Wray, he said that the FBI does expect cyber actors to continue to target the elections of 2020. He says to undermine voter confidence. And point blank, Wolf, he said, we know our adversaries are relentless. Wolf?
Sunderland, now a day after Mueller's testimony, the Senate has not once but twice blocked bills aimed at strengthening election security. What's going on over there?
Well, Democrats, Wolf, are certainly trying to capitalize on this moment in the wake of Mueller's testimony and potentially in the wake of this Senate intelligence report today, hoping that they could change minds in the directions of the many election security pieces of legislation that is floating around there. But two times in 2 days, Senate Democrats have tried to bring different pieces of legislation to the Senate floor, and 2 times in 2 days, Senate Republicans have blocked the legislation from being able to go forward. And this time, today, it was personally blocked on the floor by Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. Here's what he had to say.
It's just a highly partisan bill from the same folks who spent 2 years hyping up a conspiracy theory about President Trump and Russia.
And Republicans in the past who have blocked similar measures have argued that they believe that Congress has done enough to respond to election security concerns. Of course, this certainly has made Democrats up here on Capitol Hill very angry, up in arms, and I suspect we will see them continue to try to bring these measures to the Senate floor. Wolf?
All right, Sunderland, thanks very much. Sunderland Srifati up on Capitol Hill. Let's get some more on these warnings about Russian election meddling. Joining us now, CNN senior justice correspondent Evan Perez and former FBI special agent and CNN law enforcement analyst Anthony Ferrante. He served as a top cybersecurity official with the FBI, was in charge of cyber incident response for the National Security Council. He was also one of the first people to see the Russians hacking into state election systems. Guys, thanks very much for coming in. This was an attempt, if you believe all these reports, right, Evan, and I think they're very, very credible, that the Russians want to not only undermine U.S. national security by sowing dissent, things like that, but actually going into state and federal election systems and trying to change the outcome.
That's right. And look, so far, according to this report, there's no indication that they've done anything to change any voting totals, any voting counts. But this is a sobering report, Wolf, because it reminds us that a lot of the infrastructure that was in place in 2016 that the Russians managed to get into in all 50 states, that is still in place. A lot of states have not updated the infrastructure. And again, this is a country where all of this is handled on the state level. It's not the federal government that runs the elections. And that's one of the strengths of our system, because it means that you have to, if you want to change vote counts in all places, you have to go through the trouble. But it also means that you have weaknesses, some vulnerabilities that are all over the country. And in some cases, people really have not figured out how to fix those systems. And so the question is, can you get those things done before the 2020 election? You
were, Anthony, one of the top cybersecurity officials over at the FBI. You were one of the first to witness the Russians going into trying to influence or try to penetrate state election systems, hack into those systems. Does this report, what we're hearing now from the FBI director, from Mueller, does that really capture the enormity of what's going on?
Yeah, well, this report is very consistent with what I witnessed firsthand. It's also very timely, and let me explain why. First, it's important because now the world knows, not only do representatives on the National Security Council and in the intelligence community and at the White House, not only are they aware of it, but now the American people are aware of it. And now they know that starting in 2014, a large-scale coordinated campaign to disrupt the 2016 presidential election took place, and behind it was the Russian government, okay? And this is also a very timely report. Why? Because now is the time that we need to take action to make sure this doesn't happen again in 2020.
So what are you hearing, Evan? What needs to be done to fix this?
I think one of the first things that needs to happen is you need to have people in charge of the election systems who actually believe that this is a problem. One of the things that we ran into, Wolf, in reporting on this back in 2016 was that we would call some of the state officials and we told them some of the things that we were hearing from talking to officials behind the scenes. They were working on what they were seeing from what the Russians were doing and all of the concerns that they had. And we kept running into officials who were simply, because of the partisan atmosphere, believed that this wasn't really a problem. They didn't think the Russians were doing anything. Some of them thought that this was just a plot by the Obama administration to try to swing the election for Hillary Clinton. And so what we need, first of all, is to people to understand that this is actually a problem and that they want to fix it. If you read this report, it's 67 pages, not that long. People should read it. And they should probably reach out to their local officials to see what they are doing to make sure that this doesn't happen again. Certainly what Anthony and some of his colleagues were going through at the time, there was a big concern that come election day, maybe they're not going to change the voting totals, but they will disrupt things just in a couple of places to give people pause and have lack of faith in the outcome of the election. And that's as big a problem as actually changing any voting totals.
This Senate Intelligence Committee report, the 67 pages, suggests that state election officials were not sufficiently warned by the federal government of the threats out there. You were there. You were working in the FBI at the time. Is that a fair criticism?
Unfortunately, I do think it's a fair criticism, Wolf. Back then, when this had taken place, yes, we had seen this activity before from adversaries, nation-state adversaries. We'd never seen it at this scope and scale, and we had never really been in an environment like this. It was extremely sensitive. We had a presidential candidate declaring the election was rigged. We had states that were demanding that they run the elections as they see fit, and you had the federal government watching Russia poke and probe electoral infrastructure, and we didn't know what their motives were. It was an extremely tense time. There were hundreds, if not thousands, of people within the U.S. government laser focused on this, and it was just a very, very sensitive time.
Evan, one of the recommendations in the report is that the U.S. create a list of what they call potential responses to hostile foreign powers to send a clear message. If you try this, something is going to happen to you. What are they talking about?
Well, I think they want to make sure that there are people, at least the United States, telegraphs to these countries that there are consequences to some of these actions. And so, look, I think during the 2016 elections, I think President Obama tried to say some of this, but as Anthony points out, I think, frankly, the government was caught flat-footed, and the response perhaps was not as robust as it can be. And we'll see, Wolf, because we still have a president who doesn't believe that this actually occurred to the level that it did. He doesn't accept some of the assessments of the intelligence community. So it's not clear that you can have the DNI, you can have the FBI director saying this stuff, but if the president doesn't really buy into it, it's not clear whether the effect will be the same.
That's a very important point, Evan and Anthony. Guys, thanks very much for coming in. There's more breaking news right now. A new effort by Democrats to get a hold of President Trump's tax returns. CNN's Kara Scannell is working the story for us. Kara, what are you learning?
Well, Wolf, so the House Ways and Means Committee has just released new documents from their archives that show that congressional committees have previously relied upon this kind of weird little arcane part of the U.S. tax code known as 6103 to obtain a president's tax records. Now, this is a big development because Donald Trump has said that it had been unprecedented for Congress to use this provision of the tax code to obtain a president's record. So what the House Ways and Means Committee has just released are these documents that date back to the 1970s. And that's when the Joint Committee on Taxation had used this provision to obtain some of President Richard Nixon's tax returns. Now, in this instance, Nixon had agreed to voluntarily turn over some of his tax returns as they were reviewing how he was treating certain charitable deductions. But the committee needed more information, and they went to the IRS and they successfully obtained it. Now, this, of course, is because of this fight that is going on between the House Ways and Means Committee and the president to obtain his tax returns. Now, these are two different committees. Now it's the House Ways and Committees, then it was the Joint Committee on Taxation. But these committees are only 2 of 3 that are allowed to use this provision, 6103 of the tax code, to obtain the president's tax returns. So this is viewed by Democrats as a very strong piece of precedence that they can use as they have this legal fight that is now in court to obtain the president's tax records. Wolf.
All right, we'll see if it has an impact. Kara Scannell reporting for us. Thanks very much. Joining us now, Republican Congressman Will Hurd of Texas. He's a member of the House Intelligence Committee. Congressman, thanks so much for joining us.
Wolf, always a pleasure to be on with you.
All right, let's get back to the breaking news. This new Senate Intelligence Committee report painting a very frightening picture of how the Russians could build on the capabilities they developed in 2016 to create chaos here in the United States on Election Day 2020. So why can't election security bills, for example, make it through the Senate right now?
Well, I don't know which the bills that the Senate is working on, and just because somebody says a bill is election security doesn't necessarily mean it's election security, and that presupposes that a lot of work hasn't already been done. There's been several pieces of legislation that has done well over $500 million to provide support to election security in the last Congress and also in this Congress. Last Congress, I chaired a subcommittee on information technology, and I actually held, 2 Congresses ago, back in 2016, I held the first hearing on election security actually before the 2016 election. And from that time, there has been a lot of updates, even after that election. For example, there were some secretaries of state who were reticent from taking support or help from the federal government in hardening their infrastructure. And that has changed since then. And so the Senate report has been done over 2 years, and some of their conclusions, some of those problems have probably been addressed. We have to remember there's about 100,000 different election systems in the United States of America. And you have the voting machine that the person actually uses to select their vote. You have the machines and the systems and the networks that tabulate those votes. And there's a lot of steps that are taken to add security around those. And so we should have the right machines. The Department of Homeland Security has been working with our secretaries of states that have asked for this type of help. But defending and protecting these machines is just one part of the puzzle, right? And I'll use an example. My old business partner, when I was involved in a cybersecurity company, we're involved in working with a metro system. And this metro system, we figured out that we could actually get access to the train. But we can only slow it down. But what we were also able to get access to was the speaker system. So you could use that speaker system to create more pandemonium than you could, getting access to the train. And this is the case that we have to think about with the Russians trying to get into our election. They want to see doubt in our elections and our ability to conduct free and fair elections. And so you don't actually have to penetrate the machine in order to see that doubt. That's why this issue of disinformation is something that we need to be developing a strategy around, and just hardening or improving the defenses around those electronic systems is just one piece of the puzzle.
Well, as the U.S. intelligence community concluded, they want to sow political dissent here in the United States, can create as much anger as possible among the American people. They think that is in their interest. Robert Mueller yesterday in his testimony before your committee, the Intelligence Committee, he said that Russia's interference continues, even as the two of you were speaking and you were questioning about it. But why did so many of your Republican colleagues in the House Intelligence Committee seem so much more interested in discrediting Robert Mueller than countering this very significant threat from Russia?
Well, I would like to see all of Congress pay a little bit more attention on how we counter this threat on Robert, on that the Russians are trying to do, instead of just white gloving the Mueller report. Now that that's behind us, let's put that same level of attention and focus on dealing and developing a strategy to ultimately deal with this. And so let me be clear. There is one thing that Republicans and Democrats agree on. The Russians tried to influence our elections, period, end of story. And the Russians have been great at disinformation and doing these kinds of things. It's more than just 2016. They've been doing this for decades all across the world. And so it's not only having an impact on our elections, but we should be working and learning from our friends, countries like Estonia, Moldova, Georgia, Ukraine, have seen this as well.
You make a fair point, Congressman. A lot of Republicans are with you. They see this threat, but why don't we ever hear about it from the President of the United States himself?
Well, you'll have to ask the President that question. But
are you concerned? Are you concerned that he doesn't speak about it? He doesn't talk about it when he goes out and speaks about a whole bunch of other issues? He seems to ignore this Russian threat of election interference.
But the federal government that's involved in protecting our country and our infrastructure, they're not ignoring it.
But don't they need leadership from the commander-in-chief? Wouldn't that be significant if he personally got involved and told the director of national intelligence, told the FBI director, the CIA director, and others, told members of Congress, Republicans and Democrats in the House and Senate, hey, this is a huge problem. If we don't fix it, we're going to have to go back to paper ballots. We don't hear that from the president.
But that doesn't mean that this isn't happening, right?
It may be happening, but don't you think he should be taking the lead?
Well, I want the FBI taking the lead. I want Department of Homeland Security taking the lead. Department of Homeland Security is the entity that has been designed to work with the states on securing our election infrastructure. I want experts that are doing this. They know this is a threat. This is something that we have been working on. And I also think that it's up to Congress to start talking about strategies on how to deal with the broader issue. So I know that the intelligence community is focused on this and making sure that they're working with domestic entities, that we're prepared for this, that they're learning and taking lessons from other countries that have been involved in this. And so I know the entities that are involved in protecting against this threat recognize that this is a threat. The FBI recognizes that they didn't do the notifications in 2016 that they probably should have, and have taken steps to correct that. The Department of Homeland Security has put more resources towards this problem as well. And so the entities that are going to be involved in making sure that we continue to have free and fair elections are working towards that. But the next step that we need to have is if a Russian, if the Internet Research Agency says that they hacked into a machine in X state and they didn't really do that, how is that countered, right? And ultimately, the federal government shouldn't be telling the press what to say. How are we going to make sure that information gets out there so that that the Russians or other countries aren't able to influence the election or create that discord and that concern around this? And Bob Mueller in his testimony, and I believe Director Wray today in his testimony in the Senate, made it very clear that it's not just the Russians that we have to be worried about. And so I do know that, and I've been involved in these conversations with folks in the intelligence community and federal law enforcement to deal with this, and been working with secretaries of states as well.
And you speak with a considerable amount of authority, not only as a member of Congress, a member of the intelligence community, but earlier you were a case officer over at the CIA, so you understand the capabilities, you understand what the Russians are up to try to create political chaos here in the United States. Congressman Will Hurd, as usual, thanks so much for joining us.
Wolf, you have a good rest of the evening, man.
The breaking news continues next. President Trump takes a victory lap while divided Democrats weigh their next moves on impeachment in the wake of Robert Mueller's testimony. Plus, the gaffe with the presidential seal that cost someone a job. There's more breaking news we're following. Deeply divided Democrats weighing their next moves in impeachment tonight following Robert Mueller's testimony before two House committees. Our senior White House correspondent, Pamela Braun, is joining us. Pamela, the president believes Mueller's testimony was clearly a victory for him.
That's right. Well, President Trump has been muted today about Russian election interference amid dire warnings from top officials. But sources tell me, Wolf, that he's in good spirits and feeling vindication as Democrats grapple with what to do following Mueller's testimony.
Tonight, the White House is claiming victory after former special counsel Robert Mueller's high-stakes testimony.
I thought yesterday was supposed to be this unbelievable movie, better than the book, and Bob Mueller was going to pave the golden road, the yellow brick road toward impeachment. Clearly that didn't happen. It's not happening.
The Trump campaign thrilled with the outcome and using the moment to urge surrogates on a conference call to underscore the president's message that Democrats will now suffer in 2020.
The Democrats lost so big today. Their party is in shambles right now.
They can't get over the 2016 election. They haven't a clue how to beat him in 2020. That's pretty obvious.
Democrats, for their part, now plotting their next move and whether impeachment proceedings are still on the table.
Today was a watershed day in telling the facts to the American people. With those facts, we can proceed.
But House Speaker Nancy Pelosi threw cold water on the idea, at least for now.
The fact that why I'd like it to be a strong case is because it's based on the facts and the law. That's what matters, not politics, not partisanship, just patriotism.
Pelosi privately told her caucus to do what's best for them, but pushed back on the notion from some members that not pursuing impeachment is a violation of their constitutional duties.
But it's not about me, it's about our caucus, it's about our country.
And tonight, another battle brewing over immigration after a California judge halted President Trump's third country asylum ban, just hours after another judge said it could go forward pending lawsuits. White House Press Secretary Stephanie Grisham slammed the judge's ruling as, quote, the tyranny of a dysfunctional system. This, as CNN has learned in exclusive new documents, that hundreds of red flags were raised internally within the Trump administration about how families were being separated at the U.S.-Mexico border, some months before the controversial zero-tolerance policy was announced.
And Wolf, it doesn't appear that the president is focused on immigration tonight. Instead, he's weighing in again on Twitter about A$AP Rocky, an American rapper being held in Sweden after a confrontation with two men that was caught on video. Sweden charged the rapper with assault even after the president said he would talk to the prime minister to get Rocky out. Now, Trump is chastising the U.S. ally for not releasing him, saying Sweden, quote, has let our African American community down in the United States. I watched the tapes of A$AP Rocky and he was being followed and harassed by troublemakers. He added, give A$AP Rocky his freedom. We do so much for Sweden, but it doesn't seem to work the other way around. And then he said Sweden needs to take care of its, quote, real crime problem. Wolf, the president has gotten unusually involved in this case after several celebrities, including Kanye West, have pushed for his release tonight. This certainly seems to be escalating the situation, Wolf.
Certainly is. The U.S. and Sweden clearly at odds. Pamela Brown at the White House, thanks very much. Let's get some more on all of this. Democratic Congressman Ted Lieu of California is joining us. He's a member of the Intelligence Committee. Congressman, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Wolf.
We got a lot to discuss, but let me start with this new Senate Intelligence Committee report. If Russia used 2016 to grow its capabilities and learn more about American election infrastructure, what are they capable of doing in 2020?
All right. Thank you, Wolf, for that question. What the Judiciary Intel Committees showed yesterday with Special Counsel Robert Mueller is that both Democrats and Republicans agreed that the Russians systematically, in a sweeping manner, attacked our elections in 2016, and they're going to do so again. The House of Representatives has passed two bills to the U.S. Senate to prevent that election tampering and hacking from happening. Unfortunately, Mitch McConnell and Senate Republicans are not taking those bills up.
But you say that Democrats and Republicans agree on Russia's 2016 election interference. If that's the case, why haven't we seen by any major election security bills in the Senate, for example? They seem to die pretty quickly.
So the House of Representatives has passed those bills. I don't know what's going on through Mitch McConnell's mind, but clearly he is not taking these bills up for a vote. If they were taken up for a vote, they would pass. So I don't know why he doesn't want to strengthen our election security. One of these bills mandates that these machines be made in the United States. Who could be against that? So it's not clear to me why the Senate Republicans are blocking these bills.
It's a serious problem. You were at the center yesterday of one of the most dramatic moments of the hearings with Robert Mueller. He had to walk back his testimony to you in response to your questioning that the reason that they didn't formally indict the president because of the Justice Department guidelines. The sitting president can't be indicted. But you say Mueller fully understood your question. Doesn't Mueller's correction, which he later provided, prove otherwise?
This is what was so odd about that exchange. Special Counsel Robert Mueller agreed that the OLC opinion prevented a sitting president from being indicted. And then the Republican member after me asked him a series of questions to try to get him to walk it back. And he did not do that. And then it wasn't until there was a recess in the Intel committee that he started to walk some of that back. I don't know who got to him. I don't know who talked to him. But that was very odd what he did.
Well, what are you suggesting that, because he said he misspoke, he didn't understand, or whatever it was, that's why he wanted to clarify and walk back his response to your question. Are you saying he only did that because of pressure from someone?
I don't know, but he clearly answered the way he answered to me, and then he had numerous times to walk that back by the next Republican member who asked him a series of questions on the exact same issue, trying to get him to walk it back. So I don't really understand what happened, but we all agree, and even Robert Mueller would agree, that there is an OLC, Department of Justice opinion that says the sitting president of the United States cannot be indicted.
Yeah, that's the way he repeatedly said he was working under those guidelines. Mueller declined to even read from his report in response to a lot of questioning from the Democrats. His answers were short, sometimes stilted. Do you think he did a disservice to his report during those hours of testimony yesterday?
I would have liked if Special Counsel Robert Mueller was more talkative, but he did say yes and true to a large number of devastating facts. He also admitted in my questioning to the first two elements of obstruction of justice that were satisfied. And then on the third element, intent, I simply read from his report, and it said, quote, substantial evidence, unquote, of evidence for intent. So basically, it's as if Robert Mueller says, look, here is a piece of bread. I'm putting a piece of ham on that bread. Then I'm going to put another piece of bread on that ham. And we say that's a ham sandwich. And he goes, no, I'm not going to call it that. Well, it's a ham sandwich. So that's essentially what he did. He laid out all the evidence, and it meets all the elements of obstruction of justice.
The House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, says it's still not time to open impeachment proceedings in the House. Is this debate more about a lack of political will than a lack of evidence?
Speaker Pelosi is an amazing speaker. I'm honored to be on her leadership team. She's going to make this decision in consultation with the Democratic caucus, and whatever decision she makes, I'm going to respect.
How likely is it that your committee, the Judiciary Committee, would launch a formal impeachment inquiry on its own without a full House vote?
We're not going to go rogue, Wolf. Everything that the Judiciary Committee does will have the blessing of Speaker Pelosi. I'm going to tell you what's going to come next. We're going to file litigation to get the grand jury materials that we have not yet been able to see. We're going to file litigation to compel Don McGahn to come and testify publicly before the Judiciary Committee. And we've asked Hope Hicks to come back and testify because she lied to us the first time that she testified.
Lots going on, and we'll see if you succeed in that effort. Congressman Ted Lieu, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Wolf.
Just ahead, how did President Trump end up standing in front of a fake presidential seal, showing a two-headed eagle clutching a set of golf clubs? The breaking news tonight, 2-year Senate Intelligence Committee investigation of election interference, raising lots of red flags and serious new concerns about the upcoming presidential election. Let's dig deeper with our experts and our analysts. Susan Hennessy, this report, and it's 67 pages, very detailed. It illustrates the confusion, the miscommunication, the lack of information during Russia's attacks on the U.S. election infrastructure in 2016. And it says, quote, Russia may have been probing vulnerabilities in voting systems to exploit later. So what does that mean looking ahead to 2020?
Yes, I think that this is yet another alarm bell. We've seen a couple of this about the risk we face in our election infrastructure. So one of the things that this report makes clear is that there's no evidence that votes were changed in the 2016 election. That's good news. Just because it didn't happen in 2016 doesn't mean it can't happen in 2020. This report is a testament to how incredibly vulnerable we were then, how incredibly vulnerable we remain today. Remember, foreign actors, in order to achieve their goals here, don't have to actually change vote counts.
Right.
All they have to do is insert a measure of uncertainty into the election outcomes, right? Imagine if in the 2020 election there were serious questions about whether or not we could trust vote counts. Imagine a contested election when the president of the United States, when he was a candidate, suggested that he might not concede an election if he didn't win, suggested that that an election might be rigged, right? These are really, really serious issues, and they're reasons why we need to have absolute integrity in our systems. Now, we've seen really good work being done at places like the Department of Homeland Security. Notwithstanding all that good work, we aren't seeing a serious commitment to funding election infrastructure. We aren't seeing even sort of the basic steps, in part because Republicans are blocking what should be non-controversial bipartisan measures. And no matter what we do on sort of the technical election security side, if you don't have a president who's committed to nation-state deterrence, to communicating to other countries that they can't do this, then there's very little that you can do sort of below the presidential level, to defend yourself if you don't have that deterrence.
B0mb, the report says there was no evidence that actual votes were changed in 2016. But today, the director of cybersecurity at the Department of Homeland Security issued this warning. Listen to this.
To be clear, in 2016, while the Russians attempted to interfere, we don't have any evidence that they were in a position to change a vote, to alter the vote count, or otherwise manipulate the outcome from a quantitative perspective. I'm not resting on that.
Even if they haven't changed a vote or can't change a single vote, Russia would still win if it creates this impression that the election system here in the United States is vulnerable. Is that right?
Absolutely, Wolf. And we know that Russia targeted all 50 states, penetrated some more than others, including the state of Illinois, had access to some 200,000 voters' information. So this is clearly an issue. I mean, the positive side is kudos to Senators Warner and Burr for really being the adults in the room throughout this process and having an effective and, for the most part, bipartisan inquiry here on this committee, looking into what they can do to avoid going forward having the same crisis. I do have to say, though, when you read this report and you look at what their suggestions are, one of them includes forceful intervention from leadership here to other rogue nations, giving them the implication that they will be punished if they continue this in a way that's not going to be beneficial to them. We've seen sanctions, yes, but thus far, Vladimir Putin, from a cost-benefit analysis, comes out on top. And not only Russia, Wolf, you're now talking about Iran, you're seeing China. There's a bunch of other actors who are seeing how successful Russia was in 2016, and they are going to be jumping on the bandwagon as well. So with all due respect to the president wanting to interfere with Sweden and getting a wrapper out, if he spent just 20% of that time focused on Russia and focusing on the American public, reassuring them that that will never happen again, regardless of where people stood politically in 2016, if there's one issue that people can unite on, it's our integrity system here with regards to elections. And I also have to say, in response to Mitch McConnell's argument now that he's not going to take any partisan legislation, if you go back to 2016, and we've all criticized the Obama administration for not doing enough and not being more forceful in response to intelligence information showing what Russia was doing, when he approached Mitch McConnell then and said, let's bring this forward in a bipartisan manner to show the American public what's going on, he said no. So it is a bit ironic to see him now saying, let's do something from a bipartisan perspective. David
Swerdlick, if nothing happens in the Senate, the Republicans keep putting up blockades to passage of any legislation, are they going to suffer politically?
No, I don't think so. I think, in fact, they would suffer politically if Senator McConnell and Republicans did move forward. I agree with B0mb that hats off to the bipartisan team of Senator Burr, the Republican chair from North Carolina, Senator Warner, the Democratic ranking member from Virginia, from working together on this and what should be, as you said, bipartisan legislation. But Republicans don't want to move forward with this in large measure because they think it will reinforce the idea that President Trump is illegitimate, even if it's only being reinforced in the idea in the mind of President Trump himself, because they don't want to go take any steps that would suggest that President Trump didn't get to the White House all by himself. So Senator McConnell is going to stand pat on this, I think, for now, especially given that it was so close to the Mueller hearings, where Special Counsel Mueller did warn that Russians are trying to interfere right now.
Let me get Jeffrey Toobin to weigh in. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Why would President Trump want to stop Russian interference when he won the last time with Russian interference? He wants to win again.
Yeah, but we don't know if that Russian interference actually changed votes, do we?
Well, there are lots of ways to win in elections, except other than, changing the dials on the voting machines. I mean, we've had report after report about how, WikiLeaks helped them, and social media, at the Internet Research Agency in St. Petersburg helped him. This is in part how he won, and he doesn't want to stop that process. I mean,
but if I could.
Go ahead.
I totally agree, and I get what you're saying, Jeffrey, but I also think that, as I mentioned earlier, it's not just Russia now. So maybe Russia has, as Vladimir Putin said specifically, he was in favor of Donald Trump winning. Perhaps that'll be the same for Russia in 2020. But what if Iran has different ideas? What if China has different ideas? They see how, what if North Korea has different ideas and decides to back somebody else? You can see a disinformation campaign going towards a Democratic candidate. You could see how this spirals out of control, and it's not necessarily always going to favor Donald Trump.
And the Russians want to sow dissent here in the United States. Right. B0mb, let me get your thoughts, because you're an expert on Russia and related issues, a very different subject. The president, took the stage the other day in front of a group of conservative students, Turning Point USA. He did so in front of a screen with a fake presidential seal on it. Look at the differences. The eagle has two heads, similar to the eagle on the state seal of the Russian Federation. The eagle is clutching, get this, a set of golf clubs. The group says there was no malicious intent, that the staffer responsible has been fired. But what's your reaction?
Well, first of all, good thing that the staffer has been fired. If this were a sitcom, if this were Veep, we would be laughing right now. But who's laughing are the Russians and Russian media. In fact, I looked at what they were covering, and they're covering just this, making fun of the president, making fun of his support team for even allowing this to take place, and calling him Putin's puppet.
All right, Jeffrey, go ahead, because I saw you smiling.
Well, no, I confess that I find it funny. It speaks very ill of me, but I find it funny. I find it interesting that the president is taking a firm stand in support of African Americans as long as they're in Sweden. So, their progress is being made here.
All right, guys, everybody stick around. There's more news we're following. Look for a different, more aggressive tone and strategy from Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden in next week's CNN debates. CNN political reporter Arlette Saenz is joining us right now. Arlette, you're getting new information from your sources. What are you learning?
Yeah, Wolf, Joe Biden is certainly adopting a feistier approach. The former vice president and his staff showing that they are ready to fight back against critics heading into that next debate. One advisor telling me that Biden is not going to take attacks on his record sitting down. With CNN's Democratic primary debates less than a week away, frontrunner Joe Biden is going after two of his biggest critics, both of whom he'll share the debate stage with. Biden taking a more aggressive stance against Kamala Harris on health care and Cory Booker, who is attacking Biden's criminal justice plan.
For a guy who helped to be an architect of mass incarceration, this is an inadequate solution to what is a raging crisis in our country.
Biden firing back, taking aim at police practices in Newark, New Jersey, while Booker was mayor.
His police department was stopping and frisking people, mostly African-American men. If he wants to go back and talk about records, I'm happy to do that, but I'd rather talk about the future.
The former vice president also knocking Harris's stance that she could pay for Medicare for all without raising taxes on the middle class.
Well, I find that people who say that for Medicare for all, that they're not going to tax the middle class because you don't need to do that. Come on. What is this? Is this a fantasy world here?
The more aggressive approach is a change in tune for Biden, who said this before the first presidential debate.
I think it's a gigantic mistake if Democrats, 20 or whatever number we have, go after each other. It's only going to make it easier for this guy to win.
But after the last face-off, where Harris attacked him on his opposition to busing, Biden decided he needed to fight back.
There was a little girl in California who was part of the second class to integrate her public schools. and she was bused to school every day. And that little girl was me.
Biden telling donors last night, quote, "I'm not going to be as polite this time." And he also had this to say about his relationship with Harris.
I thought we were friends. I mean, I hope we still will be.
His team insists Biden won't get personal, but will draw contrast on policy and records.
You can't run for president and beat Donald Trump without leveling with the American people what you're going to do and how you're going to pay for it.